Out. Okay, great. Thank you. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Heather Fleming. I am the founder and director of In-Purpose Educational Services, as well as now the founder of Missouri Equity Education Partnership, which is a grassroots effort that has been developed to just make sure that some of the things that are being said about equity education in our schools, et cetera, that we teach people that no, that's not what it is, and that this is actually something that helps us all. And so this is Diversion in Classroom. Now, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that I've put a lot of information at the beginning. And so if I need to, I can't find my phone. If I need to, I might have to skip some stuff and we'll save it for another a town hall meeting, okay? So some housekeeping things. One of the things that I'm asking is that everyone except for the panelists remain muted during the discussion, okay? You can post your comments and questions in the chat, and those questions that are really relevant to what we're talking about right then, we have Deborah monitoring, and so those questions will definitely be answer right then. Any other questions we're going to try to save to the end, and hopefully we can answer as many of them as possible if we have time, okay? One of the things that we are doing, and we want to make sure that we are coming around this as a common idea, is that we are engaging in a conversation aimed at understanding. And so we are asking everyone to engage respectfully and genuinely. But individuals who cannot will be exited from the webinar so that we can recenter the focus on the learning, understanding, and making connections. Again, we're not here for this to be a contentious conversation. We're here for this to be an honest learning experience shared by a group of individuals who all, I'm sure, want to do what's best for our children and for all children, okay? Now, one of the things that I always present when I do my training is these 6 agreements. I've developed these 6 agreements over the years of me doing training. So the first one is trust and speak personal experience. What that means is that you, as often as possible, use I statements. Unless it's something that you have that you are basing in actual research, etc., we still want to speak from personal experience, and we want to trust other people as they share their experience and share their truth. Question broad narratives based in stereotypes. Right now, a lot of the conversation that's taking place is around some very broad narratives, and not all of them are true or accurate. And so we want to make sure that we're straying away from that, and that we're really focusing on individual stories and accurate fact-based information. Listen to understand and not respond. My great uncle used to always tell me, hey baby, listen twice, speak once. And I love that, because there are times when I'm like sitting there ready to think about what my response is going to be, when I just need to sit back and to listen. And so we're asking people to do as much listening as possible. Next is to reject shame but process guilt. Shame researcher Brene Brown talks about this idea that what shame is just the feeling that I am bad, whereas guilt is the feeling I've done something bad. Shame makes you feel as if you are in a state where you're incapable of changing. It just is who you are. Well, when it comes to these conversations and what we're talking about, and even the systems, etc., we all have the ability to make change. And so that's what we want to do. If there's something that maybe we've done in the past, yeah, process that. Think about how it may have harmed. But when it all comes down to it, shame is not the feeling that we want you to feel at all. This is a learning process for all of us, all of us. And then finally, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is a hard conversation, especially if you're not used to engaging in it. And so if you're uncomfortable, that's okay. Sit back for a minute and think about why you're uncomfortable. In my book, I actually have an acronym, MILA: mind, identify, lean, learn, and then act. And so those steps go into how do we process some of this information that we're receiving that may not, make us feel comfortable. Mind's what you're feeling. Identify that feeling and why you were feeling it. Lean into it. Take a minute to think about it, reflect on it, etc. Learn from it. What are you supposed to take from it? What's the positive that you're supposed to take from it that's going to help others and help you to be able to better interact with others? And then finally, act. What changes are you going to make in order to make sure that maybe you're not in that position again, or what changes you're going to make as a result? What are you going to do as a result of what you've now learned? And then finally, be further along in the journey than when you began. Dr. Maya Angelou used to said, her saying was, I did then what I knew how to do. When I knew better, I did better. So every conversation should be a matter of, I'm learning something new, and whatever I'm learning is an attempt for me to do better as far as my community is concerned, as far as children are concerned, as far as my colleagues are concerned, etc. Okay? All right. Now, one of the things that we're trying to examine is why. Why do we need kids to have equity education? Why do we need equity in education? There's actually kind of a two-part reason for this. One is that teachers need to learn more so that they are prepared to accept all kids into their classroom and to be aware of different experiences, to make those experiences within the classroom valid, to validate those experiences, and then as a result to teach their children as best as possible. And so we're teaching teachers basically how to love on their students better. And then the next thing is for the students. What did they get out of it? What did they learn from it? And so one of the things that we've learned through research is that, listen, when we sit and we say, hey, I'm not biased, I don't have, the reality is we all have biases. I could go through all of the brain aspect of it, but our brain likes to categorize. We like to put things into order. And sometimes that leads to the formation of biases that end up shading the way that we process information. And what research finds is that it starts early. It starts early. By 30 months. Most children use race to choose playmates. When we look at kindergarten, when we look at six-year-old plus, there's a lot that kids learn from just interacting every day. And we learn it as early as with babies at 3 months. Babies look more at faces that match the race of their caregivers. So we're already developing biases that we need to be able to process. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. It's just the way that our brains work. We want to categorize. We want to look for the familiar. We want to be able to say, okay, I know this, and now that I know this, that's what I feel more comfortable with. And so we have to find ways to make sure that children have diverse experiences. The next thing, there are economic benefits for all of us to equity and to creating an equitable community. One, the Metropolitan Planning Council, they did a meta-analysis of 100 of segregation patterns in the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the US. And then they took the findings and they applied it to Chicago. And what they found is that, and I think this was in the year 2017 that they applied it to, there's a positive impact of just desegregating. And by desegregating, that also means making sure that our communities are equitable. And that is that regional earnings in just the Chicago area would have increased by $4.4 billion and would have raised the region's GDP, gross domestic product, by $8 billion. Crime would have been reduced by at least 30%, which would have saved 229 lives in 2016. And then better education would lead to an estimated 83,000 more people with bachelor's degrees, which means $90 billion in lifetime earnings. That's big numbers. And the next thing we find is that, hey, St. Louis, as far as our numbers, it's not too different from Chicago in terms of segregation, in terms of our schools, which neighborhoods are there, poverty rates, etc. Another thing that would be good is our kids learn cultural competency in an increasingly diverse world. And so cultural competency is the ability to understand, communicate, and effectively interact with people across cultures. Cultural competence encompasses being aware of your worldviews. And so we don't want people to think for a second that it means that you have to give up your worldview or anything like that. You actually become more aware of where you stand and how you view the things that happen in your life, how you view events, etc., as a result of learning from equity. Developing positive attitudes towards cultural difference, gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, and then developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures. And that will be increasingly important because we are moving towards, whether we want to or not, we're moving towards a global economy. We depend on China, we depend on, different countries around the world, just as they depend on us for goods, for, materials, for different products. And so that's becoming, and then with the internet, of course, now I can go online and order anything from anywhere. And that ends up becoming important. And just the reality of diversity in our country. This was around the 2020. So this was from the census data released in late 2014. Around the time the 2020 census is conducted, more than half of the nation's children are expected to be part of a minority race or ethnicity. What we ended up finding was that, yes, in the state of Missouri, I believe that our numbers went up by like 2 or 3%. But bottom line is, yes, we are getting more diverse as a state. By 2060, just 36% of all children under the age of 18 will be single race, non-Hispanic white, compared with 52% now. And as a whole, the country is expected to become majority minority in 2044. Okay, so that means that we have a country that no matter what, we've got to learn how to live with one another better, because it's changing, whether we want it to or not. And then I'm checking the time, make sure I don't run out of time. And then here's another reality. Race shapes everything about our lived experience. And what that means is that we have to be intentional about what we're teaching and what our children are learning. I don't know what happened to the words there. And so when it comes to race structure, when it comes to children, race structures so much stuff. The education they receive and the experience they have between school and school. Hold on one second, I'm missing this. Between schools, it becomes important. The next one, youth exposure to and treatment with law enforcement in the juvenile justice system. Another one, the bonds children have or do not have with family members because of racialized mass incarceration and the war on drugs. Another one, kids' experiences in foster care and the child welfare system. Children's access to health and even pain medication. The knowledge children receive through sex education about their body and their sexuality. It impacts where kids live and play. There was this survey that I saw, it was like a correlation. There's a correlation between poverty in an area and the number of trees in that area. And so it's things like that that we don't think about, but it is impacted. Family wealth holdings that offer children profound experiences and opportunities. Well, that was it. And so I'm done talking. Now we want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Chloe Telly. Chloe, would you like to tell us a sentence or two about yourself?
Hi, my name is Chloe Telly. I am an educator with the Webster Grove School District, specifically the high school. I teach seniors and I teach sophomores, but I also work with my church as a minister of music and a teacher. Thank you.
Yes. So next we have Donald Looney.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. As you said, my name is Donald. I am a proud member of UAW Local 2250. I work here at the GM plant. Last term, I've been getting involved more with our local school board actions here in Wentzville, Missouri. I ran for the school board last time. Got a lot of support, but didn't quite make it. But we'll try again next time. But yeah, I feel like a lot of these lessons that we are learning in here has been kind of my experience with my own children throughout their educational experiences. So I just want to share some of my experiences with others that we may be able to bridge some of these gaps here. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Next we have Laura Horwitz.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be with all of you tonight. I focus on bringing along other white folks to talk about race and equity in our schools, in our neighborhoods, and also in how we share our resources such as money. I've worked in nonprofit and philanthropy for the last 20 years, and that's my passion.
She did not mention she's one of the co-founders of We Stories. And so even though she's not with the organization, she started an awesome opportunity for people to learn. And then last but certainly not least, we have Sheila Oliveri.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sheila Oliveri. I work with an organization called Ready Readers. We're a local early literacy organization focused on bringing about equity in education, because it is so very important, and that equity needs to start before children go to kindergarten. So I'm kind of the early childhood rep here, I think. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks. Oh, and I have 30 years teaching experience. Oh yeah, I have 30 years teaching experience in early childhood. So there's that.
So what happened is that everyone had the opportunity when they registered to pose any questions that they wanted to ask the panel. And I chose 4 of them. The reality is you all had some really great questions, and I'm trying to figure out how are we going to make sure that we can answer all of your questions, because they were amazing. So I chose 4 that our panelists for our panelists to address, and I want to go through it. Everyone, if you could keep your answers, your responses to 2 minutes each. I know that's hard. It takes me longer than that to just say like, I love you. So I get it. So, and just please watch the timer. I do have a timer here. And so let's start with the first question. How does equity education work in classrooms and schools without diverse populations? Who wants to go first?
I can speak from my experience.
Yes.
I worked 10 years of my experience came at Washington University Nursery School, which had a beautifully ethnically diverse student population, but they were kids from all over the world. And so that made for some really, really rich soil to plant those seeds. But we seldom had children of color, Black children, American children in our classroom. And so while we patted ourselves on the back for teaching this global respect for global identities,
Mhm.
it wasn't as effective because the kids knew who was from America and who wasn't from America, right? And all
Right,
the kids who were from America looked pretty much like them.
right.
So it was a rich teaching environment, and I was really dedicated to talking about um, different people who you might see in your neighborhood, or maybe not in your neighborhood in St. Louis, but in another neighborhood.
Right.
And but that took focus, and that took intent. I know, from my kids' experiences, that they were for some years in a very mixed school district, and others, they moved into a more predominantly white, affluent school district. And those were two different scenarios for them growing up. Three boys. And I'm just telling you, you're going to be friends with somebody if you're in school with them, right? Doesn't matter what color they are.
Oh, I didn't.
That's it.
Oh, I didn't realize it screams at you like that. So, yeah, good luck with it. sorry, sorry about that. Um, who's next? Who wants to tackle that question? Okay, Chloe.
Yes, hi. Again, I'm Chloe Telly, and as I told you all earlier, I have a great intersection of not just dealing with education, but I'm also a person of faith. And here's what I discovered. When people say, how does equity work in classrooms without diverse populations? Can I be honest with you? I've never experienced a classroom without diverse populations, right? So even if I had a classroom filled with all white children, all Black children, there were differences somewhere that I needed to acknowledge, whether it was a student with a learning disability, a student who may have been struggling with their sexual identity, or a student who is struggling in the area of income, and the list can go on. So my point is that first of all, as a teacher, okay, and as a woman of faith, I'm called to see the need. If I cannot see your child, I cannot serve your child. And that's what people are not quite getting here. So, and when I say I'm not serving your child because they're low income, or because they're a certain color, or because I'm serving your child so that they can maximize their ability. This is where you begin to look at your students as individuals. This is why we have to openly push back against this narrative that we are these people who insist on making this huge conformist school system. We're not. We are here to focus on your child's individuality so that we can best serve them. I serve people. Well, first of all, I see them, then I serve them. And then guess what I do, folks? I'll go back to A and B. That's what we do as teachers. So I've never been in a classroom without a diverse population. I've never been in one.
I love that answer so
Oh.
much.
So yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
I will piggyback off of that because that was gonna, like, I feel like there's two sides to the coin. The first is there's always diversity in every classroom. So if you teach from an equity point of view, you make space for each of your students to be those individuals, which Chloe just said. And the other is that I think you can't really feel prepared for the world that we live in fully, or the truth of our history as a country, if you don't have a full and multicultural education. And the truth is we do live in a really segregated city. So there's lots of us who live in communities that are predominantly white. And I think it's arguably more important to do equity work in those spaces. There's different work to do sometimes, but I can't think of anything that's shaped my understanding of who I am as an individual, my family's history, the story of this country, more than education I had not really until college about race in America. And I feel like I hear again and again from adults, white adults primarily, that there's all sorts of things they wish they knew sooner in their life, and they feel that it holds them back from having the kind of community and relationships they might like to have, and a more diverse life, which is a value that I think a lot of people hold up. But when you don't have the scaffolding in your education to even talk with any fluency about our country's history, different holidays, different traditions and beliefs, I mean, I don't think that we can do that then, and we don't have a shared story. So I've seen a lot of traction in some of our local school districts that are predominantly white, and I think it's really important in those spaces.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is awesome. Don, did you want to respond to this one or move on to the next one?
I think they covered well. Probably be doing a lot they already said, so we can do the next one.
Okay, we can do that. All right, so next one. Wait, okay, here we go. What are the best arguments to get administrators and school board members on board for this work?
Well, since I didn't go last time, I'd be happy to go first this time around.
Jump on in.
Okay, so I guess I wouldn't really call it an argument, but the point that I always try to bring to the forefront when I'm talking to administrators and or school board members, it is about representation. You know, children always want to feel like they belong. They're always searching and dealing with their own identity. And so when they can see something that they can identify with, whether it be economically, physically, socially, in whatever aspect, whether it be in the curriculum, in the classroom, or down the hallways, that kind of puts them in a space where they can feel safe, right? And I'm sure we all remember how tough the first day of school was, how tough the first day at a new school was, or even if something happened and you had to switch from one class to another, just going into what seemed like a foreign environment. And so they already deal with so many things internally. And so if we can try to make some adjustments to where we can help educators to kind of break down some of those walls, help students to be more inclusive and things of that nature, you know, because really at the end of the day, it's all about them coming into school and being safe. And once they're comfortable and relaxed, they can actually get the most out of their education. But when you're dealing with all of those other things that every child deals with, they have enough challenges on their own. So I think it's our responsibility as parents, educators, community leaders to kind of break down some of those walls and eliminate some of those obstacles. So again, I go back to representation and inclusion. I think those things are the best points to bring up when trying to get administrators and board members involved.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree with that. Who's next? Who wants to answer that next?
I can answer it.
Okay.
You know, one of my greatest concerns is, and for those of you who read my post, you know my feelings on this. Why in the world do we have to convince? It's one thing for us to convince people who are not in education, but boy, it's a shame that we have to think about how to convince administrators and school board members to service our children. This should be a non-negotiable, in my opinion, and that's where I'm at on that. But I will say this, one way, if we had to do one way, here's what I would challenge every school district to do. When you do your data, don't show me your data of your best of the best. I want every school district, because you know how we get those bragging rights through our data? Oh no, your school is only as strong as your most vulnerable populations. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all those populations that are typically underserved, and we're going to show that data only and see now how you stack up. I think every school district in Missouri should be forced to do that. Say, hey, get your data for these populations, put it up there, and now let's see where you sit. Because like I tell people, when you have people who have access to resources, when you have people who have access to pretty much everything, well yes, it looks great. Let's get that data up there. let's get that data up there for these people who might not have the resources, for these people who might have to struggle for access. So that's the argument I would challenge. Start judging yourself by your vulnerable data.
I love that. I love that. And I think that that's one of the things that kind of bothers me about this conversation, because of the fact that people are trying to make it very much like this versus that, when the reality is that our work includes your students. What we're trying to do includes your children wholeheartedly, because that's what makes it work. That's what makes all of this work if we all understand one another better, if we all understand how we need to accommodate and do better. So yes, Chloe, you're such a superstar. Okay. Sheila or Laura, did either one of you want to address that question?
Well, I'll just say, I think it's important for this group of folks, since we're working so closely on this issue, to think about how much the landscape has changed in the window that we're in. So I think that we saw last summer, when we had massive protests in the streets, the biggest protests we've ever had for racial justice in a pandemic, we saw school boards talking about this, right? And we saw the backlash to that too. So I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of, you know, how we get around the screaming and the yelling, right? Because I think that there's a lot to hide behind fear of your public meetings turning into, you know, a nice clip on CNN, right? So as far as I can tell in our own district, what I've been hearing is earnest and honest questions matter, right? Creating space for that. Actually holding up good work and telling people it matters to you, that is so big, you know, showing that you're noticing great teaching and highlighting it, describing it to your friends, describing it to your school board members. That really matters. And that's what's going to keep people in these roles, which we need. I just don't want to see more educators, particularly Black educators, burnt out, have their lives threatened, things like that. And to change that, I think we need to really make the effort to say, like, what we want to see and hold it up as much as possible.
I love that. Okay, Sheila, are you passing? Passing on this one? Okay. Next question. What can parents, particularly white parents, do to advocate for racially inclusive education in schools?
I feel like I should probably answer that. I think talking to each other is a big part. And I hear that, you know, I was part of a petition effort in my school district to support demands that Black alumni were making and teachers of color were making to see more traction in equity education. And a group of parents started a petition effort to support that. It resulted in our first director of equity being hired. What we've heard from day 1 to day 365 from that individual is you work with parents, you talk to parents, you find your people, you have those conversations, because those people who are showing up at the school board meeting screaming and yelling are your neighbors. Somebody knows them. So, you know, so I think that is the most important thing. It sounds like my sound might have gone out. So I'll just.
No, I was able to hear you the whole time.
Okay. So yeah, white folks, we have to not separate ourselves from other white folks, but really talk to them, talk about why these things matter to us and how to get on board and listen to people's concerns and do it in a humanizing way, which doesn't happen often enough, in my opinion.
Awesome. I was just reminding everyone that we are recording the session and we will be uploading it to the website. And so, well, to our YouTube channel. And so if you miss anything, you can always go back and review. Okay. All right. Next. I didn't even start the timer. Thank you for being under 2 minutes, Laura. I appreciate you. Sheila.
You know, I think as Laura said, the only way to do it is to come together with other white parents and really try to non-judgmentally, which is hard sometimes, really figure out what it is that gives them that knee-jerk reaction, you know, because I think a lot of times it's totally misunderstood what we are really asking for, and just you know, getting a clear pathway to racially inclusive education. I mean, there's a longer road for some districts than others, although all roads are long. But you know, some areas are going to be some areas of the population, I think you're going to have more pushback and more vocal and more, you know, kind of going for the jugular types of reactions when you're in, you know, social situations or meetings or town halls or something. But I think the way to deal with that is to just try to really listen. I mean, it's one of the things that's been the most important thing for me to learn over the last 10, 15 years of my life, is to talk less and listen more. And I think if we can give those parents the chance to be heard, and I'm not saying that I will agree with things that I find absolutely wrong, but I think just sometimes they feel like they're not being heard. And so just to sit sociably and try to have conversations and build some kind of understanding that, you know, we both want really good education for our kids. And I think we can agree on that. Let's talk about what the degrees are of difference in opinion here.
And that's the part, is that, you know, like I'm in a few groups for my children's school district. Well, my child, I'm down to one that's in the school district now, in school district. And, you know, it's like we bring up a point and it becomes this really contentious thing. But I wish that I could get people to understand that, you know, I get the fact that they're trying to do what's best for their children too. And what I am trying to do is talk to them about how my child and their child can be successful in the space through the education that they're receiving, through the support that they're receiving. And sometimes that's a hard message to get through, because there's so much. And I think that's what bothers me about what's happening in the political realm, is that it's turning neighbors against neighbors. It's turning friends against friends, you know? And so now we've gotten into this paradigm where it's like, either I hate you or I absolutely love you. But no, there's so many people that we can have in the middle that, you know, we just kind of like and can get along with and can, you know, talk to and work with in order to do what's best for our kids.
Can
yes, add to that? Yes.
I know I'm not on my 2 minutes, but it's really, I think, about every party feeling like someone is listening. You know, I mean, think about the people in your life in different situations that have lost it on you, right? And a lot of times it's not about you, it's about everything else that's going on in their life that is making them crazy, you know? And so I think in order to have a real conversation, which includes listening and thinking and all that, you know, you have to feel safe with that other person. And so I think the only way to make someone feel safe in my presence is to show them that I really am thinking about what they're saying. I am listening. And while I might not agree with what you're saying, that has not been my experience. I think that's a good way to say it, you know, is it like, I hear what you're saying and I'm really sorry if that has happened to you. But in my experience, this has really been fruitful
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever. So you just have to find that baseline of respect.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
it's, you're right. I mean, our whole country has, the vitriol has just poisoned the well.
It's through the roof. And okay, I'm gonna let the panelists talk, I promise. But one last point I want to make: we have really gotten into a paradigm where it's either or. And my co-host of the podcast, we had an episode that was called Yes and, because Delaney, really wanted to talk about the fact that that's not always what it is. You know what I'm saying? Yes, I support police officers. And yes, I don't want, yes, I don't want bad officers. I don't want police brutality. You know what I'm saying? Yes, I support, we can go through a bunch of stuff that is like, no, there's a yes and instead of there being an either or. And we've gotten into a paradigm where everything is either or. So for me to teach your child that the race riots of 1919 happened, the Red Summer of 1919 happened, I'm also having to teach them to hate being white. No. And I particularly feel so like offended by that because, well, those that are friends with me on my personal page, my babies are my babies. And that is like, regardless of race, regardless of religion, sexual orientation, those are my babies. And so to have people saying that the way that I taught them somehow damaged them, when like literally the day after we went to Jeff City and heard parents talking about how much their child has been shamed and all this other stuff. I had dinner with one of my students that even his mom calls me his second mom. It was him, his mom, his fiance, and his little sister, who now calls me her second mom. White student. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do that, y'all. We just don't. Okay, I'm done. I promise. Okay, Don, did you want to respond?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I guess I'm going to give an analogy. But people always ask how I feel about issues that deal with race, and how I feel impacted when I come across it. It's a sad reality that most days in life, like I have to go through life expecting that. So at my age now, I'm a little more resilient, and I'm not as sensitive to those things as others might be. However, I do pay attention to the responses of those people who are around me and those who consider themselves my friends, neighbors, so on and so forth. Because if you really possess compassion or empathy for who I am and what I go through, then you can exercise some understanding, right? And it really wouldn't be a question as to what you could do to advocate, right? Like you could be able to spot the wrong. And so I guess for me, it really comes down to just acknowledging, where we really are in the space of inclusive education and diversity and all of these things, like just acknowledging where we really are. And that's where I thought we were a year ago this time with all of the, the protest and all of the social justice movement and all of that. And then right behind this, it comes up as if we're trying to minimize someone else's experience when really we're just asking for our experience to be acknowledged. So I think that acknowledging it and accepting what has happened in the past, and then moving towards breaking down some of these barriers in the future will be the best way to go about it. But it all starts with that compassion, some empathy, and little acknowledgement.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Laura or Chloe, did you want to respond?
The other thing I think is like really helpful as white parents, which is sort of contrary to the first idea of, following the lead of folks of color and connecting with empathy with other white folks. I think like grounding ourselves in the reality of like what is the state of affairs, right? And not getting lost in the screaming and the shouting and the being and having someone unfriend you or any of these things that can feel really immediately viscerally true and hard. Our schools are not well serving Black students. Like the data is so clear. So we have to stay clear about like, what are we not talking about when we spend all our time talking about critical race theory framed in this way, right? And what is the risk? Like the worst thing that will happen, or I mean, all I can say is like, just being on this journey of becoming more and more publicly like anti-racist in my life. I have had things happen that have been hard or painful or surprising, but I have never felt like my life is at risk. My family has never been threatened. I have never needed police protection at my house. My organization I co-founded is named in this bill, and nobody's trying to dox me personally. And yet, when I connect with colleagues around the country who are doing this work, every Black educator that we know who we're fighting with, they have faced those personal attacks. And so I think just grounding in like our own resilience and reality that we can have like really difficult conversations, and we can have, friendships or relationships get frayed, and we're going to be okay, and we'll get better at things. And that is not, hurt feelings is not the same as hurt people, right? And not to get swept away by that. Because that's a real dynamic of what's getting twisted up here. And if you spend all your time talking with white folks about how much they hate the word white privilege or whatever, and it's endless, you can start to forget that what we're trying to do is actually create a world where some terrible things like, unarmed people being killed by, state sanctioned violence. We don't want that to happen to anyone, right? It is actually happening to Black folks. That's, so those sorts of things, like also, I like to hold those things together. That gives me a little bit more bravery and a little bit more empathy for the person I'm talking to. And that helps me.
Oh, hi, Maggie Klonsky. I didn't realize you were here. She is the new director of We Story. So yay, Maggie. It is very important. And okay, Maggie just commented that white fragility is driving all of this. I think that's it. Now, here's the thing. Those are words that are scary for some people because they don't understand it. And so one of the things that I have realized is a huge barrier to us having this conversation is that a lot of us don't have the same language. We don't have the same understanding of the language around this. And so we perceive the conversation in different ways. But what you said is true. Laura, when I'm doing some of my training, I use the phrase, no shame, no blame, it is what it is. This isn't about shame and blame. We can get past that. We can get past that conversation because I'm not trying to shame anyone and I'm not trying to blame anyone. I'm trying to figure out what is going on and how do we fix it? And so I'm in problem solving mode while other people are in defense mode. And it makes it difficult to engage in the conversation sometimes, very difficult. Like one of the things that I've really realized, people don't have a true understanding of what racism is. They don't. They don't. I used the research of Michael Brazel. He has 4 different types of racism that he identifies. And the reality is that most of the racism that I personally will experience will be unintentional. It won't be because someone is a bad person. It won't be because they were trying to be mean to me. And I get that. I understand that. And as a result of it, that's the reason why I'm able to move into teaching mode. But you do have a lot of people that they are not ready to deal with that. And yeah, so, okay. Well, Chloe, did you want to respond to that?
I think you all pretty much said what needed to be said, but you know, let's all drop the one name that's constantly dropped in all these conversations, Dr. King. What was his greatest warning to us? He warned the white moderate about accepting a false sense of peace. So Heather is correct. I am under the belief that most white people are not trying to be intentionally racist.
Me too.
I am completely under that belief.
Mhm.
But one thing you have to be aware of is the fact that when you choose neutrality, it doesn't help. It's not helpful to anyone. When you choose a false sense of peace, like for example, what was the Desmond Tutu quote? He says, yes, there's an elephant standing on the tail of a mouse, but the mouse sure isn't going to appreciate if you kind of keep telling them that elephant's no big deal. The biggest thing that our allies can do, anyone who wants to be a true ally, is to listen. Please take a stand, even in those private moments. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I applaud people who go to protests. I applaud people who do all these other things, but the big movement or the private movements, when people reveal and talk to you. So that's all I wanted to add. So I think you all said what you needed to say.
I'm typing this into the chat because I want to make sure that that is recorded for posterity. I forgot to add some movements, but that's okay. The big movements are the private movements. I even say in my book, don't think that you're doing this work when you go down and you volunteer in Black neighborhoods. The work that needs to be done in white organizations and white institutions, because that is where these biases are bred. Like I said, if anyone ever reads Margaret Hagerman's White Kids, brilliant book. She did a lot of research. She embedded herself into various neighborhoods, et cetera, in order to do this research and to collect this data. And the biggest thing that children learn from is what you do. The neighborhoods that you choose, the sports organizations that you put them in, your friend groups, the church that you go to, etc. The reality is that we really, it's Hagerman. Thanks, Deborah. The reality is that there are people, white people, honestly, that can go through their entire day without encountering on any level of depth, people of privilege. People of color. And so that means that they can go through their neighborhoods, they can go to the grocery store, they can go and not have any significant interactions with people of color. And as long as we have that, the reality is that, yeah, we're going to end up with, we're going to continue to end up with a lot of misunderstanding of what other experiences are, because what happens is that you begin to think that everyone else has the same experience that you do, and they just don't. So, all right. I am talking my way through you all's time. It is 7:27, so I want to respect you all's time. If you are not able to stay on, then you are more than welcome to drop off if you have to get off at 7:30. Otherwise, if our panelists can stay, I would like for you to try to answer this last question. Is that okay? Okay. So last question. Oh no, that was the last question, was it? No, this is the last question. How do we combat efforts to suppress teaching about racial disparities?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I just have to speak on this.
Yes.
So as I've gone with you all to different gatherings and I've gotten a chance to speak to people, and I think Sheila articulated beautifully earlier, what I found is that most of what has caused a lot of this chaos is not necessarily, I'll say race may be one of the factors, but it's not the only factor. What has happened here is that the best way to combat any of this is for transparency with parents. As I have spoken to a lot of these people, they have very real concerns about what has gone on in their school districts. And their questions simply have not been answered. And when you don't answer people's questions, whatever narrative is out there, that's the truth at the time. And if it's never combated or if it's never challenged in any way, shape, or form, that is the truth. And when I spoke to these parents and I got down to the bottom of it, they did not per se have a problem with racial disparities. They had an issue with the fact that they felt marginalized. And I was so glad that Sheila brought that up. Now, I'm not going to say that that's everybody, but I'm saying that one way to kind of help with some of this is the fact that we have to make everyone feel that they are a part of the conversation. Are we going to agree with everyone? No, we are not. But partially what has led to a lot of this, a lot of the mislabeling of equity, a lot of the mislabeling of CRT, a lot of the mislabeling of any of that, it's because there's just been a lack of transparency and eroded relationships with these parents. So I think one thing we can do is we have to practice what we preach. If we're going to listen to all voices, we need to listen to all voices. So
I also think it's really important that we don't treat the work that we're doing as if it's something shameful. Like that was one thing that I noticed is like, we're trying to hide what we're saying because we don't want to upset people. But at the same time, no, explain it and make sure that people understand what we're doing and that we fully support this because it also supports your children, So it can't just be a matter of, well, we don't want them to know. No, we absolutely want them to know. Yes, here's my lesson. If there's something you have a problem with, I can explain it. I can stand on it and say, this is why I put that into my lesson. That's going to be really important in the future. Okay, Laura.
So I have like a different thought about this, and I'm not sure this works. I have no evidence that it does. However, I'm really struck by the fact that as a parent, I often don't know what's happening in my child's classroom because I'm not a teacher and I'm busy. And sometimes they come home and tell me a story and it makes no sense because they're children. And you know what I do? I often say, that doesn't make sense. I might ask a question about that at my next opportunity if I really want to, like parent-teacher conferences, or I'll read the newsletter, or any number of other things. Or I might be like, I don't know how they teach reading these days, whatever, right? I feel like sometimes just being like, one time my kid had a bad day in math class and they felt bad about their ability to do math. But you know what? I didn't go to the state and say maybe we should outlaw math, because that would be absurd. So, like, I just feel like being like, let's take the same situation, which is being a parent generally. Things have changed since I was in school. You all, like educators, call things different things. I assume because your field keeps developing over time. That's what I assume. My profession does. So I would assume that's how yours works. And I really want you to teach the best stuff that you know today. That's what I want. That's why I don't teach my kids at home. That's why I'm glad virtual schooling is over. I mean, like, I think we have to just kind of, to some degree, be like, this is ridiculous. Teachers know what they're doing. Teaching should change over time. If I didn't learn this when I was a kid, maybe that's because we know more now, which we do. I mean, certain things like the fact that, like, take the 1619 project. The reason that's groundbreaking is because it's pulling together a bunch of contemporary research into a very accessible way. A lot of that research hasn't even been in academia for more than 20 years. So it's not ending up in K through 12 curriculum. You know, it's like, I don't get upset when my kids aren't using the 2G computers that I use. I do get happy when they're doing Oregon Trail. I'm like, oh, I can really do that well. But if that's what they were coming home every day telling me they were doing, I would feel like we have a real problem.
I love that. I love that so much. One of my favorite quotes is the fact that, you know, teaching education is one of the few professions where everyone feels like they know what it is, and because they've all been through school, and so they think that they know what it is. And the reality is, no. I was an educator for 14 years, and I'm going to tell you what, the things that you have to manage, research shows that teachers make more minute-to-minute decisions than brain surgeons do. And look, the teachers on here are like, absolutely, because of the fact that you've got to be looking for, look, what is this person doing over in the corner? Who's not understanding? How do I check for faces? Oh my goodness, what, you know, you have to check for so much on a minute-by-minute basis in order to have classroom management and in order to serve your students. That, yeah, it's a lot of work, and I'm sorry, it's skilled work. It's skilled work. And until people get the fact that, listen, if you wouldn't go in and tell your mechanic how to put in a new transmission, don't come in here and tell me how to teach a novel, because the reality is, or how to teach reading, or how to teach anything, because the reality is we are doing so much, and we're doing it with skill. The most successful teachers are doing it with a level of skill that a lot of it has to come naturally. Everyone that's been in a classroom, they know what the it factor is. You know what the it factor is. So there's some teachers that have it, and there's some teachers that don't. But it goes beyond even going and getting your teaching degree and learning how to teach. It goes beyond that, because you have to do so much for your students. And that's why I think it really offends me that people are questioning the dedication and the professionalism of our teachers. I'm professional enough to not try to sway my students, but to get them to see multiple perspectives, to get them to think critically. They don't have to agree with me. Just think about it critically. So, okay. I'm such a bad host because I talked my way through it. Yes, Sheila.
I just wanted to comment on or mention a comment that Jess posted in the chat, which is, you know, we talk a lot about individual teachers, especially those of us who have taught for the majority of our careers. But, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the forces at play with the topic that we're talking about, with equity in education, with teaching actual history, not the revisionist history that our kids have been, you know, spoon-fed for generations. You know, it's a lot of this is being pushed by not grassroots parent organizations, but organized entities out there who then influence legislation. So while I think that it's important to do the work in our communities with our next door neighbors and the people on our blocks to try to do that, I think we do have to realize that, you know, there's a bigger force at play here. And, you know, they have maybe not the most altruistic reasons for pushing their agenda.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And we've got to work. We've got to listen to that. We've got to pay attention to that because we're letting ourselves be used in the service of it.
Absolutely. If I may.
Go ahead, Don.
Okay. So I guess to kind of piggyback on what Sheila said there, I think we have to realize that the efforts that they're putting isn't really about racial disparities, but it's really about dismantling our public education system. And that's where those higher powers and, you know, those top level people come in at. While they're using, you know, the CRT or the, you know, the mask mandates as a distraction, you know, they're really attacking the state dollars that are going, the state and federal dollars that are going into our schools. And the sad part to me is what they don't realize. First of all, I grew up, I went through the public school system in Omaha, Nebraska. For a very long time, they had an excellent DSEC program with magnet schools and, you know, singing things of that nature. But by the time I graduated, I noticed how the money was leaving the school districts and the magnet schools, and even the schools in the more affluent areas where I live weren't as well equipped. The new textbooks weren't coming as they were before, right? And so all of this essentially dismantles a society, a city. You know, you get lower graduation rates, crime rates go up, prison population increases, salaries go down. I mean, it's all a trickle down effect. And that's the part of it that frightens me. And that's why, you know, I chose to try to get involved with what's going on in my local school district. Because like I said, I see the end game, and they're using these small tricks here to kind of distract from that. So again, we have to recognize, first of all, that it's really not about racial disparities. I think our children are light years ahead of us. I keep saying this over and over again. I think all of our children are light years ahead of us in all of this. And I think that when they come across some of these things, they're actually conflicted because they identify with their classmates, whatever their social, economic, racial, or gender background may be. They identify with that person, but when they're told that thing or that person or that way of life is not okay, it becomes a problem for them. You know, so we got to work on that part of it. I think I went over my time, so I'm gonna stop there, but we'll continue on that later on.
I forgot to start the timer again, so we wouldn't have even known. So, okay. Yes, that is something that, and if anyone doubts it, watch my testimony and the interaction that I have with the senators. They don't deny when I bring that up, they don't deny it. They actually engage in an argument for supporting it. And so that is part of this whole thing. Okay. I'm gonna let you all go soon, but I did want to just remind you some upcoming events that we have. September 20th, we're going to have one on engaging in discussions about inclusion. And so some of the, basically what I'm gonna be sharing with you is some of the tips that people I've been in discussion with at the state level have been engaging in in order to address it. And then I'm going to be recruiting people that are engaging in some of these conversations and meeting with success. I'm going to ask them to please be part of this discussion so that we can really get some good talking points going and a clear understanding of how do we address some of the questions that people have and how do we enter into these conversations about inclusion in our classrooms. And then October 18th, I'm really excited about this idea, but we're going to have a teach-in where basically there's going to be several different teachers. We're still, asking teachers, but there's going to be several different teachers who will be in breakout rooms, and they'll be actually delivering some equity lessons. And the reason why I really like this is because, it's hard to be scared of stuff that you're engaged in, that you've actually experienced. And so I want to be able to have people experience, here's what we mean when we say equity education, and to see that, no, it's not the big scary beast that everyone is trying to paint it as. And so, oh, thank you, Laura. I just got your message. So yes, if you have any suggestions, please email me. My email is heather.fleming@inpurposeea.com. That is inpurposeea.com. I will stick it in the chat for you all so that you can see it. Okay. So there we go. There. And then, as you know, I'm also the director of In Purpose. And so I want to tell you about our fundraiser that's coming up. Here's the reality. All of the work that I'm doing right now, a lot of it is like unpaid, because we need to do the work. This is the actual work of it. And so the way that we help to support is through our events, our fundraisers, etc. And so, yes, we're going to have a fundraiser. It's going to be really cool. There's going to be a silent auction with some really amazing items, etc. You can get a team together, $300. You get your own dedicated bay, etc. The food is going to be delicious. They're having these things. It's like these frosted donut holes, and then you get this injector that you can inject your own filling into it. And it's going to be, it's like raspberry and then cream and then something else. You get like 3 different choices of what you want to. Yes, y'all come for that alone. Come for that alone, okay? And then if you want to find out more information, or if you want to share this particular program with other people, we're going to be posting it to our website. And so you can access it either at www.missouriequity.com or at www.inpurposeea.com. And while you're there, root around and check out some of the other stuff. One of the things we're doing is we are reopening our shop in the Equity Education Partnership, so you can get your own yard signs, t-shirts, for adults that say let them learn, and then for children that say let us learn. And we have a limited number, and so once they're out, we've got to do a whole new order. So get in while you can. Okay. All right. Oh, Amy. All right. Thank you all for being here. I hope to see you on September 20th, and I hope to continue the conversations. Okay.